Every community has its minorities, small groups of people that are of a different race or religion, or simply from a different place from the rest. CNA Correspondent travels to 3 of the world's most dynamic cities to tell you the stories of the minorities within. Thirty-something Vivek Mahbubani just wants to be known as the funniest man in Hong Kong, period, hoping that his audience sees past his ethnicity.
Being not Chinese and understanding Cantonese, it is like a superpower. Now, 2 girls got on the train, they sat next to me and spoke over me in Cantonese, like I don't exist, right? So I'm sitting there, one girl's like, "喂，Mary 啊，一陣做咩啊？唔知啊，但係呢個人咧坐中間咧真係好衰，有冇搞錯？" Which basically means, "Hey Mary, what do you want to do today?" "I don't know, but I don't like this guy." And I sat there, they finished talking, and I was like, it is my turn to show them my superpower. So I simply took out my mobile phone, and in Cantonese just said, "Why?" And finally, the super move, I was like, 冇啊，今日出去買蘇跑做咩啊？
Vivek is of Sindhi descent. Tracing his ancestry back to the Sindh region, he is a 3rd-generation Hong Konger. A Hong Konger is a native and inhabitant of Hong Kong because as a special administrative region of China, Hong Kong doesn't have its own nationality laws. Very early on, his parents realized the limitations of not speaking Cantonese, the local language, so they sent his older sister and Vivek to public schools. At his primary school, he was the only one of 5 non-Chinese kids and was often teased, called names.
I would come back home and tell my parents, "Oh, my friends called me an alien. Are we aliens?" And my parents would say, no, let me explain to you what race is, different ethnicities and stuff like that. Later on, when I got to secondary school, my way of dealing with discrimination was to make a joke out of it. When I first started comedy, was actually talking about my body hair. And I would say, like, my friends would tell me, "Oh, you got so much body hair. What are you, a monkey? What's wrong with you?" Right? So I would say, no, this is really useful because in summer, I never get mosquito bites. They just get trapped in my hair. They can't bite me.
Making people laugh turned into a calling.
Okay, we just gotta wait.
Inspired by sitcoms like Seinfeld about the fictional life of US comedian Jerry Seinfeld, Vivek entered a local comedy competition in 2007 and was crowned funniest person in Cantonese. The following year, he won in the English category and hasn't looked back since, going on the comedy circuit around Southeast Asia and Australia.
終於有隻狗打呔咯，扮晒老師咁樣係咪？但係講起喂，我想講樣嘢咧，就好多人話啊 ，V 你識講中文啦，但係點解你英文咧，即係有美國口音嘅 ？Why can you talk like you know like 去咗外國讀書咁樣？因為我喺香港讀書，而大家會明白咧，喺香港讀書嘅人咧，我哋唔係英文渣，係香港教育教得好差，即係大家好明顯咧，即係大家都知我哋英文堂咧係垃圾㗎嘛，係咪？
In the early days, Vivek played up his ethnicity card, joking about his heritage and the family's culture, but has since moved on, talking instead about general life as a non-ethnic Chinese Hong Konger.
If I go to the more rural areas, like an urban area, basically go up to the new territories, all of a sudden people look at me like, "Oh, why is this guy over here? Like, are you lost? Can I help you?" I truly believe it'll take one more generation of mindsets to change this mentality because the previous generation is still stuck with the idea of what's on TV. And on TV, you get maybe one non-Chinese person and fitting in every stereotype, and that's what they are.
And Vivek is doing his part to dispel the stereotypes. He's regularly invited to speak. At this secondary school, the audience may be impressed that an Indian is speaking to them in fluent Cantonese, but he only wants them to remember that a person made them laugh, telling them stories about growing up in Hong Kong and the struggles he faced.
I always say you can survive without Cantonese in Hong Kong, but you can't really thrive in the same way any local can.
According to official statistics, there are roughly 584,000 people classified as ethnic minorities in Hong Kong, making up about 8% of Hong Kongers. Most of them are from the Philippines, Indonesia. Domestic helpers account for more than half of that total, and South Asia, the rest. South Asian immigrants came to Hong Kong as early as the mid-1800s, seeking employment and citizenship when the British newly acquired the colony. Many had made significant contributions, like Dorabji Mithaiwala, who founded the Kowloon Ferry Company, today the city's iconic Star Ferry Company. Despite this, many struggle to find acceptance. Studies have shown that non-Chinese continually face systematic discrimination, especially when it comes to access to education, jobs, and public services, both before and after the British handed Hong Kong back to China in 1997.
And I started in an accountancy firm. I was told very clearly, this was pre-97, so pre the time Hong Kong was handed back to mainland China. I was told very clearly that I would have no future in that organization because there was a track in this international accountancy firm for white partners and Chinese partners. I'm neither. When we were married in early 2000, we went to see an apartment and we were denied actually entering the house because the landlord saw us through the grill and said to the agent, not knowing we can speak Cantonese, we're not going to rent to Indians.
Civil societies lobbied hard for race equality, and anti-discrimination laws were finally passed in 2008. Shalini Mathani is fourth-generation Hong Konger of Sindhi heritage. She co-founded the Zubin Foundation with her husband, a charity that focuses on ethnic minority groups.
1/4 of Hong Kong's ethnic minorities live in poverty.
The foundation also actively raises awareness about racial integration as a think tank. When a 2014 University of Hong Kong study showed that out of 100 advisory bodies to the government, less than 2% of the 1,400 plus members were ethnic minorities, the foundation took up the cause with the government. The Carrie Lam administration has since appointed 25 minorities to serve on 37 government advisory committees, this in a bid to promote inclusion. Shalini believes that it's a good start, but more needs to be done.
People are not taught that Hong Kong people can be my colour. I'd much prefer that people called me a Hong Kong person instead of an ethnic minority of Hong Kong. And if we must use that term ethnic minority, then I'd prefer to be called a Hong Kong ethnic minority because I'm Hong Kong first. I'm a Hong Kong ethnic minority.
Hong Kong's tagline is Asia's World City. But there's little doubt racism still exists. And changing the mindset of the majority is key for Hong Kongers like Vivek and Shalini to be truly accepted.
On July 1st, 1997, British rule ended in Hong Kong. That date is not just monumental for Hong Kong, it also began a fresh chapter for a minority in the British Army. Their story after this break. These are the Gurkhas, feared and ferocious Nepalese warriors renowned for their bravery, traits that caught the eye of the British military, which recruited the Gurkhas' services in 1815 to fight alongside their own troops. Much of the Gurkhas' military history has been recorded at this museum in Winchester, an hour outside of London.
The diorama shows the leading company, commanded by Lieutenant J.D. Grant, together with Havildar Karbir Pun and his men, breaking into the fort under a hail of fire and stones. Both men were wounded. Lieutenant Grant was awarded the Victoria Cross and Havildar Karbir Pun the Indian Order of Merit.
Darren Bowyer is the director of the museum, and he told me it was this bravery that led the British Army to recruit Gurkhas after the two sides fought numerous bloody battles against each other in the early 1800s.
They recognised very early on the fighting spirit of the Gurkha soldier, the loyalty they show and the absolute dedication to their cause. And so it was very obvious that, you know, if one could have them fighting on your side, it was very much better than having them as enemies.
Since then, the British military has drafted hundreds of thousands of Gurkhas to fight in conflicts around the world. Many young Nepalese have lost their lives, around 15,000 in World War II alone. But their sacrifice and their bravery have not gone unnoticed. The British royal family has thanked them for their service and honoured them with titles and medals. And their integration with the British Army has meant that many have looked to the UK for life after their service.
I think there are around about 16,000 Gurkha families living in the UK today.
Bishnu Bahadur Gurung is one of those Gurkhas who chose to make Britain his new home. He served in the British Army for 19 years and was stationed in Singapore, Brunei and the UK. After 2004, Gurkhas who had served 4 years in the military were offered the chance to become British citizens and settle with their families in the UK. And that's helped the British Army to be able to continue to attract recruits into its Gurkha contingent today. Mr. Gurung says for many of these young men, the risk of death whilst serving is worth the shot at a better life.
If you die, then end up the history. But if you survive, you will get a better life, better career, and including your families.
He searched for a new career away from the military that would integrate him into the community, finding an opening as a bus driver in London. For 15 years now, he's been shuttling people around the British capital. It's helped him to start a new life in the UK, buy his own house and move his family to Hounslow in London. But that's not all. He was elected Mayor of Hounslow this year, a West London community with a population of about 200,000. Mr. Gurung is the first Gurkha to be elected to the role in Hounslow, a position he's extremely proud of. And it's hard to miss the nod to his heritage in his office at the centre of his desk, a kukri, the Gurkha's most famous and feared weapon. For him, his mayoral role is an opportunity to give a voice to ethnic minorities living in the UK and a chance for him to give back to the community that welcomed him.
It's not only in the Nepalese group. I do work with the all sort of Nepalese in Hounslow, like the Nigerian community, Sri Lankan community, and Somali community, police community. You know, we all together.
Whilst many Gurkhas, just like Mayor Gurung, have found success in the UK, others say they have struggled. Those who retired before 1997 say they received a much smaller pension than their British Army counterparts. That, they claim, is unfair and has led to numerous protests against the British government. Protests like this. Mr. Shyam Kumar Thakori, a veteran Gurkha with 22 years of service, told me why they were there.
Because we did the same job and we want the same payments, you know, either pension or benefits and all that, to be equal.
Originally, the Gurkha soldiers were based in the then British colony of Hong Kong. They would return to Nepal after discharge and receive a pension rate suitable for the cost of living there. On July 1st, 1997, as the British handed Hong Kong back to China, the Gurkha base shifted to the UK. Those serving after 1997 had their pension rates matched to the British soldiers. But veterans like Mr. Thakori, who served before 1997, their pensions remained the same. After 13 days of protests outside Downing Street, they had a response.
The Ministry of Defense has agreed to the establishment of a bilateral committee at an appropriate level between the government of Nepal and the government of the United Kingdom, as well as representatives of Gurkha veterans.
Speaking as a veteran, Mr. Gurung praised the announcement of talks, which will run into next year.
Hope it will resolve the problem sooner.
He would like this to mark the start of a better future for Gurkha veterans in the UK, but more than that, he hopes this will further strengthen the bond between the Gurkhas and the United Kingdom, so it will be as strong in civilian life as it once was on the battlefield.
Conflict created the need for the Gurkha regiment in the British Army. Conflict also led to the creation of millions of refugees. Many are here in India's capital, New Delhi, and their future looks almost as uncertain as when they first fled their homes. Their story when CNA Correspondent returns. New Delhi. It's long been a city of refugees. After independence in 1947, the city took in 500,000 refugees from modern-day Pakistan. Many of them set up home here in Lajpat Nagar. But as you navigate these crowded streets, one lane transports you to Afghanistan. You've now entered Little Kabul. Men and women holding on to their Afghan identity, culture and cuisine. 21-year-old Jamshed Faizi runs one of many bakeries here that sell traditional Afghan bread or Nanu's Beki. Generations of Faizis have been bakers in Afghanistan, and Jamshed and his cousin are carrying on that tradition.
क्या था कि अफगानी लोग इंडियन रोटी नहीं खा सकते हैं, वो छोटा रोटी जो है वो नहीं खा सकते हैं, कहता है कि ये हमारे लिए सही नहीं है, फिर उनके लिए ये रोटी अच्छा है.
This is incredible. It's so fluffy. It's got a slight sweet aftertaste, and it's crisp on the outside but very soft and dense on the inside. Very nice. Thank you. But perfecting this bread is back-breaking work. For these bakers, the day starts at 5 a.m., ends well past 10 p.m., and they don't take a single day off. On a good day, they manage to sell 600 pieces of bread, but even that earns them barely enough to get by. Jamshed once dreamt of joining the Afghan army, but he says the endless conflict at home forced him to seek refuge in India 3 years ago.
काम यहाँ पे ऐसा है जो है कि हम लोग काम के बारे में जितना भी सोचते हैं, जैसे सोचो कोई सी दलदल में फंसे हुए हो, क्योंकि आप काम के बारे में जितना भी सोचोगे इससे आगे बढ़ नहीं पाओगे, कोई और काम के बारे में सोच भी आप ही नहीं पाते हो.
Like most Afghans who live in India, Jamshed and his cousin aren't officially recognized as refugees. India isn't a signatory to the UN Convention on Refugees and doesn't have a policy that outlines how all refugees should be treated when they arrive. This means each person must individually apply to the government for a long-term visa. It's a long process and the only way to get government-issued identification. Without that, it's impossible for any refugee to find formal employment in this foreign country. Afghans first started coming to India after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and have continued to turn to India for refuge even today. 20,000 Afghans live in India today, and the largest settlement is in Little Kabul. And the man who represents this community is Ahmad Zia Ghani. Hi, Ahmad. Hi. Thanks so much for meeting us. Thank you. Like most Afghans you meet here, hospitality comes first. The family brews some special subs chai or green tea for me as Ghani shares his concerns about raising a family in a new home.
ज़रूर है ये बात, क्योंकि हम रोज़ शाम अफ़गानिस्तान के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, मैं अपने पेरेंट्स के साथ बात करेंगे और इनका इंटरेस्ट बहुत है. उसका फ्रेंड इंडियन है, उसका स्कूल इंडियन है, उसका शायद रोज़ाना 10 घंटे ये इंडियन माहौल के साथ है, वाले फिर भी उनका बिल्कुल डिफरेंट कल्चर, खाने का डिफरेंट कल्चर.
Ghani sourced this streaming device from Afghanistan so that his children can watch movies and TV shows in their native tongue Dari. This is also how his children have learned how Afghanistan has recently changed.
ये तो अफगानिस्तान में आपको ही पता है क्या ऐसा वहाँ सेफ नहीं हो सकता क्योंकि आप न्यूज़ में देखते ही हो क्या होता है.
Ghani tells us he left Afghanistan 9 years ago after he was forced to pay his life savings in ransom to the Taliban who had kidnapped his eldest son. He was able to prove to the UNHCR, the UN's refugee agency, that he had a valid reason for seeking asylum in India. After getting a long-term visa by the Indian government, he found work as a manager at a clinic in Delhi. But the family can still hardly get by.
फिर मेरे को तो मेरा और मेरा फैमिली का सब तो आधार कार्ड पैन कार्ड ये सब मिल गया है कि बच्चे के स्कूल के थ्रू मेरे को काम जॉब के थ्रू वाले 99% अफगानी के पास ये फैसिलिटी नहीं है. जब अभी हम देख रहे हैं कि दिन टू दिन यहाँ जीना बहुत मुश्किल है. मुश्किल क्या क्या अनपॉसिबल है. अगर आप सोचें एक फैमिली जिससे मैं हूँ, अभी मेरे पास कुछ जॉब नहीं है, हॉस्पिटल जॉब, इंटरनेशनल बिजनेस नहीं, मेरे को अभी जॉब नहीं है, मेरे को वो नहीं है.
Last month, he led this 2-week-long protest outside the UNHCR's office in New Delhi. For years, they've been living at the very fringe of society. They say they can no longer go back home, but increasingly staying on in India, despite its many freedoms, is becoming a daily struggle. These Afghan refugees say they should either be given the status of permanent refugees or be relocated to another country where they have access to better opportunities and can finally live, they say, a life of dignity. When Afghan refugees first come to India, they get issued temporary ID cards from the UNHCR and are considered asylum seekers. The UN agency decides on a case-by-case basis who can be granted refugee status. For 6 years, Meena and her sister Sarah have waited. 18-year-old Sarah wants to become a doctor, but without the government ID, she can't even go to school. And without papers in the middle of a pandemic, they can't access healthcare either.
जो बच्चों है स्कूल नहीं जा सकते हैं, हॉस्पिटल में दिक्कत है. जब हॉस्पिटल जाती है, मेरी मम्मी को एंजाइटी है, उनको 2 बार या कोमा में चली गई थी, 2 रात आईसीयू में रहती है. फिर आपको पता है कितनी प्रॉब्लम है. वह जब चली गई, वो बोला पहले आईसीयू दो, फिर मैं इनको रजिस्टर करूँगी. ये आपको कितनी दिक्कत लग रहा है आपको. सिर्फ हम लोग बोलते हैं हम लोग को रिफ्यूजी चाहिए बस.
अब हमारे पास एक उम्मीद थी कि चलो अगर नहीं हुआ हम अपना देश वापस चले जाएंगे, पर अब कैसे जाएंगे. अब तो कभी भी नहीं जा पाएंगे हम. यहाँ पे अगर हम आए इसका मतलब अब कभी भी नहीं जाते. अगर हमारे पास इतनी सारी प्रॉब्लम्स नहीं होती कि हमें अपना देश छोड़ना पड़े तो हम कभी भी यहाँ पर नहीं आते. प्रॉब्लम है तभी हम छोड़ के आए हैं.
The protest was called off after the UNHCR promised to help. It says it will consider reopening closed cases on an individual basis, but there are limited places and only the most vulnerable will be prioritized for resettlement. Back at Ghani's home, the children can glimpse the life their parents led in Afghanistan through family albums. From the youngest to the oldest. Afghans who've left their country for India know that life is no longer possible. For now, their future looks almost as uncertain as when they first fled their homes.